This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Not gonna put it out, no, I'm gonna let it shine. Not gonna put it out, no, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Shine all over Mozambique, I'm gonna let it shine.
We served in Mozambique with the Igreja Methodista Unida de Mozambique. I was the director of Shakuki Rural Hospital, which was a health facility in the city of Mashish in the Inhambane province. Elizabeth did water, sanitation, hygiene, and entrepreneurial work. And let me tell you a little bit about Mozambique. So Mozambique is 2 times the size of California, and you'll note it's in the southern part of Africa, bordering Botswana, South Africa, Eswatini, and I think Tanzania. At our time, it was the 7th poorest country in the world. And Mashish, where we lived, was a fishing village located about 7 hours north of the capital of Maputo, which is still, from that picture, in the very southern part of the country. It was a tight-knit kind of group where we took daily trips to the market for fresh fruit and veggies. And it's not like here. Once the season for the food was gone, it was gone. For example, mangoes and avocado season were my favorite, and avocado season was short. And after they were gone, we wouldn't see avocados for another year. But until then, you'd load up on mangoes and avocados. And when I tell you, you literally picked them from the tree and ate them, that's exactly what happened. In the bottom left, you'll see a traditional house, which is great because Mozambique is on the coast near the equator, so it's extremely hot. Those traditional houses allowed for wind to come through, but still protected people from the elements. It was a hard place to live, but a beautiful place too. A little actual story, this couple, Santosh and Edna, who the picture is, tomorrow is their wedding, and we're going to zoom in for that and get to be a part of that as well. So in December of 2018, we transitioned our jobs to local Mozambican leaders, and we were reassigned to our current roles in the United States. It's kind of the best scenario, to work yourself out of a job and have the opportunity to turn over the responsibilities to local leadership. While we were sad to leave Africa and parts of our heart still remain there, it's been a blessing to be closer to family. Where we are now in Central Arkansas, Little Rock, has allowed us to continue our passion of working with communities to develop a missional presence locally, regionally, and internationally. And as we become more accustomed to our virtual format, we're fortunate to have expanded our circle of contacts, and we'll find ourselves speaking to churches from Montana to Southern Mississippi, and the occasional career day at the neighborhood schools. And the bottom left is at a small church over 100 years old in Grand Cane, Louisiana, where we were speaking. Actually, I think that's Mansfield, Louisiana. And the picture on the right is at our daughter's school, Annie's school, and her class, when they invited us for career day to show that the different types of careers. And then I think the picture in the middle just pretty much sums up our family. This was a Thanksgiving ride we took and said, let's take a family picture. And that's kind of what it is. It speaks to our personalities. It also speaks to the craziness of our life sometimes. For those who have been involved in missions, whether it's short-term or advocacy or support, you can attest to that the job you're sent to do does not encompass the entirety of the role you assume. This is the same for my responsibilities as a mission advocate. So what I want to do today is kind of split these in two and talk about the job that I have versus what I do. So first, let me talk about the job. The country of the United States is split into 5 jurisdictions, with each jurisdiction being made up of United Methodist conferences or groups of churches determined by density and geographical lines. Our job is with the South Central jurisdiction, which is the best jurisdiction, I'm letting you know, even though I may be a little bit biased. As mission advocates, we serve 8 states and 12 conferences, including the Oklahoma Indian Mission Conference. Each conference has a designated person called a Conference Secretary of Global Ministries, as is required by the Book of Discipline. There are many of them that are on with us right now. This secretary is responsible for organizing mission boards and connections in local conferences. We serve as an information conduits between these conference reps and global ministries. We help to resource and inform everyone on the 4 strategic directions of global ministries: church growth through evangelism, international and domestic disaster response, global health, which encompasses the Abundant Health Program, and the sending of missionaries. Elizabeth and I are still global missionaries. We still see our job as building relationships. We maintain our passion to serve the community in which we live. It just looks a little bit different from a more US-based context. Essentially, we connect the church to missions and missions to the church. And I'll take it a step further to say that we connect missionaries to churches and churches to missionaries. Missionaries allow local churches to participate in God's mission in the world without having to leave their homes or their networks. And churches are anchors to missionaries as they serve in difficult times and difficult spaces. The connection of both the church and the missionary are instrumental in the success of each entity, with faith as a through line. And I've said this to Elizabeth, and she's like, yes, that's true. But I think really God is the anchor, and the church is the expression of God to the missionary, and missionary is the expression of God to the church. And so our responsibility is to kind of connect those dots and to provide those ways that, that the Holy Spirit can move freely through. So global ministry says mission is from everywhere to everywhere. This means that we have more than just Westerners serving as missionaries. There are missionaries from many different countries serving in 70 other countries worldwide. There are missionaries from outside of the United States who are serving in the United States. So really, missions is at everywhere and in everywhere. So I'm called to bear witness to what God is doing in the world. And my job is to do that by being a mission advocate. But what I do, what my role is I bear witness to God's work in everything. I try to bring God's light and love to everything that I do. And I do that by being part of my community, going on long walks and bike rides and smiling and saying hello to everyone I see, by opening car doors in the morning for students at the elementary school, and by getting to know my neighbors and their needs, by being a contrary voice in a place that's burdened with racism, classism, and hate. I provide a listening ear to pastors who pour so much into others that they find themselves in need of some support. I advocate for a United Methodist Church, one that celebrates diversity, difference of opinion, and transformation through the Holy Spirit. I tell stories. I listen to stories, and I cannot stress enough the significance of listening to people's stories, to listening to their journeys and their lives, not in a way that tries to solve or change anything, but in a way that tries to understand. To hear without judgment or response can be so validating, and it truly recognizes the holy inside each person. And that's what I try to do. I don't always succeed, and I'm not always good at it. And that's why I'm thankful for grace. I want to bring your attention to the quote from Bishop Cynthia Figueroa Harvey. This is something that brought us great comfort and direction during our time in Africa and still scopes our call to ministry today. She said, "Hold nothing sacred but the mission." And so I ask, what is it that you see as your mission? Because we are all missionaries. You don't have to cross the ocean to serve. Maybe you just cross the street. But we are all called to serve in some form or fashion. You being on this Zoom call right now, me knowing you and your hearts shows that this is to be true. How do you, or how will you answer God's call of service? That's my question for you. Okay, now I want to move on to more of the advocacy and education portion of the presentation, specifically when it comes to the financial support from the local church. As you'll see from this image, every dollar put into the offering plate or given on the app or sent in the mail is divided for a specific purpose. So 85 cents or 85% of every dollar stays in the local church. This goes to existing programs, pastoral support, accounts, things that are in that yearly budget. 6 cents or 6% of every dollar goes to benevolent giving, or what we call second mile giving. And that's for kind of one-offs or things that you don't know are going to happen. Someone comes in off the street, or there's a need that needs to be met, a fire in the congregant's home, that kind of stuff. There's money for that. 7 cents, 7% goes to jurisdictions, annual conferences, and districts to support and set up that infrastructure for the congregations and the greater connection of the United Methodist Church, which leaves 2 cents that goes to general apportionments. Something to point out is the 2 cents. There's a lot of talk about apportionments these days, and should we or shouldn't we pay them, and what do they mean, and et cetera, et cetera. I'll tell you, this 2 cents is split among 12 general agencies. General agencies, just like Global Ministries, who also seek the transformation of the world. And so your apportionments equate to 0.02 of a cent per agency. And so the question is, how does that affect missionaries? Well, I'm a firm believer that transparency is important, and I believe that advocacy is important, and I believe sending missionaries is important. So allow me to combine all 3 of those in this slide. It costs about $70,000 to send each missionary. The United Methodist Church has over 270 missionaries. So the Global Ministries missionaries, the global missionaries cost about $70,000 each. And if we look at the bottom right at the expense side, you'll note that just under $51,000 of that is for salary and benefits. Note, I'm not saying salary, I'm saying salary and benefits. And then about $11,300 goes to mission-related expenses. And that is getting a missionary set up in their place of assignment, their housing, getting them to there, finding them the appropriate infrastructure needed so that they can survive and thrive in that area. And then 11% or $7,300 is staff support, your program chairs, your HR reps, that kind of stuff. And that equates to the almost $70,000 for a missionary. And we're going to come back to the salary and benefits section in a minute. Now we look at the revenue. Apportionments, which we just talked about, is about $44,500 is where we get that for the missionary. And then advance or second mile giving, or your actual donations, make up 21% or $14,500. And the remaining 15% is from grants and partnerships and investments. And that's how you fund a missionary. Like I said, let me focus on salary and benefits for a minute. I have a pastor buddy who says the realization of the kingdom of heaven on earth is demonstrated through equitable allotment of God's resources to everyone. And so Global Ministries demonstrates equanimity in their salary and compensation policies. Every missionary is paid the same, regardless of education or where they're from or what job they're doing. Global Ministries recognizes that some people and places have a greater access and privilege when it comes to education. As a pursuit of justice, all missionaries are paid the same. So my wife, who is a doctor of pharmacy, is paid the same as a farmer from Africa. And you know why? It's because our jobs are not pharmacists or agriculture. It's because our jobs are the same. We share in and bear witness to God's mission in the world. And I think it's so cool how, I think it's fantastic how the United Methodist Church demonstrates that, specifically Global Ministries demonstrates that through equitable salaries and benefits. So we're nearing the end. Now you carry the burden of knowledge. And I ask, how can you rise to the call? When you support a missionary, you support all missionaries in the United Methodist Church. You support feeding programs, vaccine efforts, health clinics, literary initiatives, and the love of Christ being spread in the world. What an awesome opportunity to be a part of God's mission in the world. Today, I invite you into the spiritual practice of missionary support. If you already have a missionary you're supporting with your prayers and donations, great. Thank you. Keep it up. It is definitely appreciated. If I'm that missionary, I'm humbled by your outpouring of love and responsibility you give me. I hope I do it justice. If you're searching for someone to support, may I suggest myself? The information to donate is on the slide, and I invite you to prayerfully consider a covenant relationship me, which is a holy bond between missionary and church. And you can reach out to me. Vanessa will put some contact links in the chat. You can reach out to me for some more details. And if you'll notice, There are a couple of different ways, 3 different ways that you can donate to the advance. There is the online through ummission.org, which there'll be a link for that as well. And then there's mail, where you can mail in a check too. But the coolest way, I think, is for you to grab your cell phones right now, if you'd like to, and go to your camera settings and use that QR code, which is that weird little picture in the bottom right-hand corner. And it'll take you directly to my support page. So also, I invite you to find and follow me on all the social medias, Facebook and Instagram specifically. You'll notice that we are McCormicks in Motion, and Facebook and McCormicks in Motion and Instagram, because as life with children and as missionary life goes, it always feels like it is in motion. And so that's where I invite you to keep up to date with what's going on, see new things that are happening, and see how we continue to come alongside what God's doing in the world. So thank you for joining me today and being willing to hear my story and hear the small part that I play in God's world. It's been quite a journey, and I look forward to continuing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, David. Do we have any questions for David? You can unmute yourself and ask directly to him, or you can put in the chat box.
Where do you see with the virtual and all of this, y'all have adapted really well. How do you plan for the future like this?
First of all, hi, Mom. It's good to see you.
Hi, darling. Sorry.
And how do we plan to this? Well, I will say that, and this plays in well to kind of other questions we've had about COVID-19. So before March 12th, 2020, and I remember that because it's my wife's birthday, when everything kind of shut down, we were traveling very often and going and speaking at congregations and to groups, UMW groups, all different types of things. And actually our schedule had been booked until August. And so we struggled to figure out how you can contain and maintain to be a mission advocate when you can't go and see anyone. And as a lot of the people on this phone can attest, we switched to a virtual format. And it was like this learning curve, but as soon as everyone got a hold of it, it shot up. And so one of the really great benefits about it is that we can actually now be in more places than we were beforehand, because instead of 2 or 3 days of traveling plus rest, we can be in Nicaragua one day for a virtual mission trip, and then the next day we can be in New Mexico for a webinar, that kind of thing. And as we tend to move forward in the conversations we're having and what we're hearing, is things are going to be more hybrid on a go forward basis. So that gives us the flexibility over the next few years to do both and to do more. So actually, I mean, a lot of relationship building is necessary to be done face to face. Like, you get to know people not in the meetings, but you get to know people in the hallways afterwards, or hanging out playing 5 crowns in the hotel room, that kind of stuff. So that's how you really get to build those relationships that you can rely on. So there's a need for that. And I see it within our own mission advocate team, and I see it with the CSGMs. There's a need for that, but it's finding that balance between the two. So to answer your question, I guess would be the answer moving forward would be, as things start to normalize from COVID, as things start to become more comfortable with Zoom, there's gonna be a lot more hybrid interactions as well. I saw Belinda had a question in the chat.
And Beck is asking, where in Texas are you from?
San Antonio. Dad was in the Army. Fort Sam Houston.
And he also speaks Portuguese.
Um pouco.
So yeah, Belinda had a question for you. If you have some specific stories, how Covenant Support churches you're in touch with having been impacted from the relationship with their missionary.
Absolutely. So just to back up a little bit, we still have lots of time. A covenant relationship is when a church goes into a relationship with a missionary, and they do that by kind of a process of more than filling out a form, but it's kind of a binding of 2 agreements. It takes the shape of a form, but what it is a church pledges to support a missionary for an specific or indeterminate amount of time. And it's not just with donations, but it's with prayers and phone calls and just all kinds of support that the church can give the missionary. And I think a part that lacks is where the missionary also supports the church. So the missionary can call in for Sunday school classes and to do mission moments and everything. So there's really is this mutuality in it. And you see that kind of with covenant churches. A lot of what we do is we connect churches to missionaries to build those covenants, which is Belinda's talking about. And when you can have, I'll use, let's see, Karen DeStefano and Collins from Africa. I'll use them as an example, right? Karen reached out as a church, I'm going to call Karen as a church, to Colin to kind of get things rolling with that. And that relationship there is something that has manifested to where you can see Collins come into everything. So it's really this support where Collins comes and supports Karen in Bartlesville area and then vice versa. And so what happens is from the church side, the church gets to recognize that the mission to go out and to work for the transformation of the world by making disciples of Jesus Christ is done in part by missionaries, right? I mean, we have these concentric circles and missionaries are what do that. That is the mission of the church. And then we look at from the missionary standpoint, and this is what I can speak to as well. When you are a missionary, as you establish yourself, as you begin to find your community, you find these moments of just needing something that's familiar and needing something to hold on to and needing an anchor into your call of faith. And when those relationships, those covenant relationships are developed in the appropriate way, that church becomes that relationship to the missionary. And then there's some other benefits where when the missionary comes to itinerate, they are automatically sent to that church, right? And so they get to meet and greet someone that they've prayed for, both sides, and built relationships for. And that support is kind of what it is. Belinda, is that kind of what you were talking about? I have
Yeah,
a
thank you,
really
David.
good way of talking around questions and not answering them.
We call that the round the world response. So we're familiar with that in Latin America. Thank you. I was really taken by, for those who don't know, I'm a global missionary in Nicaragua. So I'm on the receiving end of this wonderful relationship with supporting our covenant churches and what it means for me. And I really appreciated what you said. If I captured it right, missionaries allow churches to participate in God's mission in the world, and churches help anchor those missionaries and connect them with God and the Holy Spirit. That's a really nice way of summarizing the relationship, which can take lots of different forms. And again, it isn't just financial. Of course, the financial support is important too, but there are many other aspects to it. So it's always interesting for me to hear, since I'm only on the missionary side, it's always interesting for me to hear from people who are in direct connection with churches. And I'm interested in getting a sense of how they feel about being in that relationship with their missionary. I know what some of my churches can say, but I'm interested from your viewpoint in a liaison position, if you will, that you're fortunate to be able to see both sides of the relationship. So thank you for sharing that and for the work you do.
Thank you. And I will bounce that back to you. Thank you.
David, I have a question. This is Sandy. Hi.
Hey, Sandy.
You've talked about your whole family as being missionaries. So can you describe a little bit about what being a missionary has meant for your kids? How do they express their experiences? And what's it been like for you and Elizabeth to have two little missionaries in your family?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one thing that kind of Elizabeth and I agreed on. It's like, we're not taking our kids, we are involving our kids. Our kids are going to be missionaries wherever we go, because we are, a very family-centered group. And so we explained to the girls that, Elizabeth and I are being called to be missionaries. We hope that y'all are joining and going to be called with us as well. And they've embraced that. And you see it here too, when, and maybe Elizabeth can share some of the stories too, but, when we first got here, we would visit churches and they would say, what do you do? Where are you from? And, oh, we're missionaries. And so they get this real sense of that's what it is. And it works out well as we kind of put the girls in elementary school, because we get to say, all right, so you're a missionary, right? And we're missionaries. And this is what we do as missionaries. And it's the same thing that I mentioned today. We tell them, you highlight where people are kind, you show love, you be a friend for something like that. Because as missionaries, we're just trying to show what God's doing. And so when we can get our girls to understand that, for one, it kind of helps them readjust to being back here, but it can help to connect them to the mission, because this is where we are for now, right? And so that's kind of how it is. I don't know if that does it. I know that they, just like all kids, sometimes it's easier to understand and cover, and then sometimes they fight with it as well. But having been in Mozambique and been here, for my oldest child, she had this idea of what it was beforehand. Not much, but understand what it was. And so there was some adjustment period there. And then my youngest, when we were here for the first 6 months, kept asking when we're going home. And then you hear that, when you going home. And so what we've seen with the girls is that I'll tell you a funny story. When we were looking for a place to live in Arkansas, we were at a playground and my girls were playing, and playgrounds were something that became kind of a treat that we did when we left Mozambique, because they weren't any really where we were. And then one of the ladies had to leave with her grandchild, and she goes, all right, I'll see you later. Maybe we'll see you next time. And my youngest daughter says, we're never going to see your kid again. And then we realized it's because that was her reality. Every few months when we'd have to go out of the country or something like that, we'd get a chance to play in the playground. She'd play with these people, make these fast friends, and then never see them again. And so I wonder, looking at them now and then, and what the future will be, how that will impact their relationships, and how that will impact, even their long-term relationships. Because I look at myself, I look at the people on this call, some of them I've had and known since the early 2000s, right? And so I think that is kind of how it is. But others, I don't know. I think it's a relationship thing. I don't know. I'm rambling now. I'm sorry, Sandy.
Can I throw something out there for you?
Please.
Last week, our youngest daughter went to church with another family at another church, not the church that we go to. And so they were in church service and they prayed for missionaries. And Annie was so excited. And she said, I'm a missionary. People are praying for me. And she was so excited to tell the family she was with that she's a missionary, and then came home and told us all about it. And she was so excited. And I also want to say it's so exciting to see everyone on this call, but especially Mr. Noe Sanal, who is in the Philippines, it's 12:35 in the morning for him, and he's joining us here on this call. Noe served as a global mission fellow with us in Mozambique, and he was one of Annie's dear good friends. I'm thinking of a picture of the two of them right now. They, in Mozambique, the people put babies on their backs and tie them around with a piece of fabric. And I have a picture of Noe and Annie, both with baby dolls tied on their backs.
I need to tell a story of Noe too, that I've been wanting to tell since I saw he was on here. For Noe's hardest issue in Mozambique was getting full. He was a growing young boy, so he would eat and eat and eat and just would never be full. So one of the other, like I said, that what you do in your job versus what missionary stuff is different. And so we went to Africa to work at the hospital, but we became like a place, just a community place where everyone would come. So it would not be uncommon to open the door and there'd be Noe hanging out, relaxing, which we loved. But for his birthday, we made 2 meals for him, 2 complete suppers, so that he was made sure that he was nice and full for that time. But yeah, I echo Elizabeth. It's really good to see you, Noe. Friends, we have about 2 minutes left.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a quick question about the advance support. Um, How does that work? Obviously, some missionaries are better fundraisers than others. And if a missionary raises more than they need, does that go into the general pot, or how does that work?
Love this question. I love this question. So when you raise money for missionaries to the General Board of Global Ministries, you are raising money for all missionaries. Okay. So we raise salary support. We have limits we have goals that we're expected to hit. But something that's great about, and I'm going to speak really quickly, something that's great about Methodist Church is that you don't have to wait and get all your support to go be a missionary. So once you were called and you were placed and God will lay that upon your heart, you go. And the fundraising that comes from that goes to the general spread of missionaries so that other people can go. So some people raise tons of money and some don't do as much, but it's that equitable portion of it that helps.